The sun hung heavy over the dusty streets of Cedar Ridge, Montana, a town where the wind carried more secrets than it did tumbleweeds. Some folks were born with a silver spoon, others with calloused hands and a back bent from labor. Clara Dawson knew the latter all too well. At 27, she was the kind of woman folks glanced at once, then looked away, as if her plainness might rub off on them. Her own pa, a hard man with whiskey on his breath, had sealed her fate with a single sentence: "Ain't no man gonna saddle himself with a face like yours." That should have been the end of it. But fate had a funny way of stirring the pot when you least expected it. Across the street, leaning against the hitching post outside McAllister's Mercantile, stood a man who'd heard every word. Jesse Colton wasn't much for talking, but when he tipped his hat and met Clara's gaze, his voice was rough as sandpaper and just as honest. "Funny," he drawled. "I was just thinking you look like sunrise after a long night." Now, before we dive deeper, tell me this: do you believe beauty's only skin deep? I've seen it in all forms, the kind that fades with time, and the kind that burns steady like a lantern in a storm. It's in the way a woman stands her ground when the world tries to knock her down, or how she tends to others' wounds while hers still bleed. That's the beauty that lingers. So tell me what sticks with you. And if this tale's got a hold of your heart, don't be shy, hit that subscribe button. There's more where this came from, stories that'll haunt you long after the screen goes dark. The morning heat shimmered over Cedar Ridge like a mirage, the town alive with the buzz of the annual cattle drive and the kind of gossip that only a wedding could stir. For the Dawsons, both had come knocking. Clara stood at the kitchen window of their weathered clapboard house, watching her younger sister Lillian twirl in her lace-trimmed wedding dress like a dandelion seed caught in a breeze. At 22, Lillian was everything Clara wasn't: honey blonde hair that caught the light eyes the color of a summer sky, and a laugh that could make a hardened outlaw smile. Clara's reflection in the glass was a stark contrast: chestnut hair, pulled tight eyes, the shade of a storm cloud, and skin roughened from years of tending livestock and mending fences. Her hands told the story of a life lived in service, palms scarred from rope burns and nails chipped from scrubbing pots, while her own dreams gathered dust. "Clara," her father's voice cracked like a whip from the porch, "quit dawdling and fix this damn mess your sister made with the bunting." She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside, where strands of white fabric and prairie flowers lay tangled in the dirt. Lillian hovered nearby, her lip quivering like a child's. "It won't stay," she whined, blinking up at the sky, as if the heavens themselves owed her a favor. Clara didn't sigh, didn't roll her eyes. She just knelt in the dust and started untangling the knots, her fingers moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime cleaning up other people's messes. Then Jesse's shadow fell across the porch. He didn't say a word, just crouched beside her, his calloused hands working alongside hers. Lillian's gasp was audible, but Clara kept her eyes on the task, her pulse hammering in her throat. "Ain't right," Jesse muttered so low only she could hear. "Making you do all the work while she plays princess." Clara's breath hitched. No one had ever noticed before. No one had cared. And in that moment, something inside her, something long buried, stirred like a seed pushing through cracked earth. Clara's fingers moved with the quiet precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime making broken things whole again. The bunting came together under her touch, the frayed edges of fabric and wilting prairie blooms, transforming into something almost beautiful, just like she'd done for every church social, every barn dance, every celebration that wasn't hers. Behind her, her father, Silas Dawson, watched with the cold appraisal of a man tallying debts. At 55, he was as weathered as the abandoned mine shafts dotting the Montana hills, his beard streaked with gray and his eyes hard as flint. "Least one of my girls knows her place," he grunted loud enough to carry. Then with a sneer that could curdle milk, he added, "Though I reckon that's all she's good for." The words landed like a spur to the ribs. Lillian fidgeted with her engagement ring, a gaudy thing from the Emersons, the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. The wedding would save the Dawsons from ruin, but it'd also hammer home the truth Clara had tried to ignore. Some doors only open for pretty girls with soft hands. "Pa?" Lillian murmured. But Silas wasn't done. His voice rose, drawing the attention of old man Pritchard from across the street, who paused in whittling to listen. "You think I'm wrong? Look at her, Lily. 27 years old and not a single suitor to speak of. Most women her age got a house full of young'uns and a husband who comes home stinking of sweat and honesty. Clara's hands froze mid-knot. She'd heard this before, but tonight with the wedding looming, the words cut deeper. Silas took a step closer, his shadow swallowing her whole. Pastor Wilkins's wife said it plain last Sunday, some women ain't meant for marrying. They're meant for scrubbing floors and tending sick parents and dying alone useful as a dull knife. The bunting slipped from Clara's grasp. The air turned thick like the moment before a thunderclap. Even the crickets held their breath. Then boots crunched on gravel. Jesse Colton stepped into the fray, his presence as solid as the mountains framing the town. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Funny, he said, slow as molasses in January. I always figured a man's worth was measured by his grit, not his pretty words. He bent down, picked up the fallen bunting, and pressed it back into Clara's hands. Their fingers brushed warm, rough alive. Silas sputtered, but Jesse cut him off with a look that could stop a stampede. And for what it's worth, Dawson, your daughter's got more grit in her pinky than most men got in their whole damn bodies. A new tension crackled in the air. Not just shame now, but something hotter, sharper. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. No one had ever stood up for her. Not once. Not ever. Then from the porch, Lillian let out a choked sob. This is my day, she wailed, her voice cracking like cheap china. Why does she always have to ruin everything? The accusation hung there ugly and raw. Clara opened her mouth to apologize, to explain to something, but Jesse's hand settled on her shoulder, heavy as a promise. Ain't you tired, he murmured just for her, of bending till you break? And just like that, something inside Clara snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but irrevocably. She straightened her spine, met her father's glare head on, and did the one thing she'd never dared before. She walked away. Clara rose slowly, her fingers trembling as they brushed the faded fabric of her dress. The street had gone unnaturally still. Even the usual creak of the mercantile sign had stopped swinging. She could feel the weight of hidden stares from behind lace curtains and shop windows. By sundown, the whole town would be talking about Silas Dawson's spinster daughter, the one even her own father had declared worthless. But then she saw him. Leaning against the post outside the saloon, a man stood watching, tall enough to cast a shadow that stretched halfway across the dirt road. His black duster was dust-streaked from travel, his boots scarred from miles, and the Colt at his hip wasn't for show. He'd been loading crates onto a freight wagon when Silas's tirade began, but now he was still as a predator, scenting blood. Clara knew strangers were rare in Cedar Ridge, and this one, with his sharp green eyes and the quiet danger rolling off him like heat from a branding iron, wasn't just passing through. He was looking at her, not with pity, not with disgust, but with a focus that made her breath hitch. Silas noticed him first. You lost, Mr. The stranger pushed off the post and stepped into the street, each footfall deliberate. Up close, Clara caught the scent of gun oil and sun-baked earth. He tipped his hat, revealing a face that belonged in the kind of stories men told around campfires, all hard lines and quiet storms. Name's Gage Thornton, he said, his voice rough as a riverbed. Rode in with the McCready cattle drive. Recognition flickered in Silas's eyes. The McCreadys owned half the grazing land north of the Missouri. But Thornton wasn't looking at Silas. He was looking at her. Funny thing, he continued, thumb brushing the brim of his hat. I was just thinking how a man who can't see the worth of his own blood ain't much of a man at all. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Silas's face purpled. Now see here. Thornton cut him off with a glance. Then to Clara's shock, he extended a calloused hand toward her. Ma'am, I've got a wagon load of supplies needing sorted at the McCready bunkhouse. Pays fair. Seems to me a woman who can turn rags into finery might be wasted on folks who don't appreciate her. A heartbeat passed. Somewhere a dog barked. Clara stared at his outstretched hand, her pulse roaring in her ears. This was more than an offer of work, it was a lifeline. A chance to walk away from the life that had been carved out for her like a grave. Then Lillian shrieked, You can't be serious. The wedding's tomorrow. Who'll do the... Thornton didn't even glance at her. Well, Clara, he asked, quiet as a prayer. And for the first time in 27 years, Clara Dawson took a step that was entirely her own. The words hung in the air like gunpowder after a shot raw, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Clara felt the heat rush to her cheeks, but for once, it wasn't from shame. Gage Thornton's gaze burned through her, his words. You look like sunrise after a long night, settling into her bones like a truth she'd always known but never dared to believe. Silas's face turned the color of spoiled beef. Have you lost your damn mind, Thornton? He barked, spittle flying. That's my daughter you're talking about. Gage didn't flinch. He just shifted his weight boots, grinding into the dirt like he was planting himself for a fight. I know exactly who she is, he said, his voice low. Question is, do you? A murmur rippled through the gathered onlookers. Old man Pritchard choked on his tobacco. Behind Clara, Lillian made a sound like a stepped-on cat. But Clara felt something wild and fierce uncoil in her chest. Then Gage did the unthinkable. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a silver concho, the kind men gave women they were serious about. The morning sun glinted off it as he held it out to her. I'd like to call on you, proper Clara Dawson, with your pa's blessing or without it. The street held its breath. Silas sputtered, caught between outrage and greed because everyone knew the McCreadys had connections, and Thornton wasn't a man to cross. But before he could speak, Clara stepped forward. Her hands, usually folded meekly in her apron, reached out and closed around the concho. The metal was warm from Gage's body heat. Yes, she said, louder this time. The words seemed to crack the world open. That night, as Clara stirred the wedding stew with more force than necessary, the kitchen door creaked open. She expected Lillian's whining or her father's demands. Instead, Gage leaned against the door frame, a shadow with green eyes. You don't have to do this, you know, he said quietly, nodding at the pots. Clara's grip tightened on the spoon. Someone does. Let it burn. She froze. Gage pushed off the door frame and moved closer, close enough that she could see the scar above his eyebrow, the stubble darkening his jaw. You spent your life feeding folks who don't see you. What do you hunger for, Clara? The question hit like a lightning strike. No one had ever asked. No one had cared. Somewhere outside, Lillian shrieked about lace. The stew bubbled ominously. Clara Dawson let the spoon clatter into the pot. And for the first time in her life, she walked away from a fire she hadn't started. The kitchen air hung thick with the scent of rising bread and unspoken truths. Clara's hands stilled on the rolling pin as Lillian's words settled between them like dust motes in a sunbeam. Outside, the last light of day painted the prairie gold, but inside something far more fragile was taking shape. You're wrong, you know, Lillian said suddenly, twisting a loose thread from her wedding dress around her finger. About men not caring about those things. She turned from the window, her face uncharacteristically serious. Last week when Huck took me to meet his family in Cheyenne, his father spent the whole dinner grilling me about crop rotation and interest rates. I nearly fainted from boredom. Clara blinked. But Huck only cares that I can charm his business partners. Lillian finished bitterly. She sank into a chair, her elaborate skirts deflating around her like a spent bloom. But you, when Thornton looked at you today, it wasn't just your face he was seeing. It was your hands that know work, your spine that's never been under pa's meanness. A tear slipped down her cheek, cutting through the powder. God, Clara, he looked at you like you were the whole damn territory. The rolling pin slipped from Clara's fingers with a clatter. For years, she'd watched Lillian bask in admiration like a cat in sunlight, never imagining her sister might feel just as trapped by it. Now, seeing the cracks in Lillian's perfect facade, something shifted inside her. Then the back door slammed. Both sisters jumped as Silas stormed in, whiskey on his breath and fury in his eyes. You, he jabbed a finger at Clara, will refuse that saddle tramp's advances tomorrow. The McCreadys might have money, but Thornton's nothing but a hired gun. I won't have my daughter. Lillian stood so fast her chair toppled. Your daughter? Her voice shook with something fiercer than tears. You haven't treated Clara like your daughter in years. Just free labor to keep your precious farm running while you drink away the profits. Silas's hand twitched like he might strike her. Clara moved without thinking, stepping between them, her flour-dusted apron, a white flag in the dim light. Something in her father's face fractured. For one heartbeat, Clara saw the man he might have been before disappointment hardened him, the shadow of someone who remembered how to love. Then it was gone. Get out, he growled. Clara didn't hesitate. She untied her apron, folded it neatly over the chair, and walked to the door. As her hand touched the knob, Lillian's voice stopped her. Take me with you. The words hung in the air, more plea than request. Outside, a coyote howled a lonesome sound that seemed to echo through Clara's bones. She turned to see her sister standing tall amid the ruins of her wedding finery, eyes blazing with a courage Clara had never known she possessed. In that moment, the kitchen walls that had held them both for so long seemed to crumble. The wedding could burn. The expectations could rot. Clara held out her hand, and together they stepped into the gathering dark. The kitchen air turned electric as Thornton stepped forward, his spurs jingling like a challenge. Clara felt the weight of every eye in the room, her father's fury, Lillian's quiet hope, Huck's awkward shuffling, but it was Gage's steady gaze that anchored her. "Mr. Dawson," Gage said, his voice rough as unpolished oak. "You're right about one thing. I could have my pick of women from here to Santa Fe." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper, slapping it onto the flour-dusted table. Clara recognized the McCready cattle brand stamped in the wax. "Signed this yesterday. Half interest in the biggest ranch north of the Platte. Makes me a man of means by most accounts." Silas's eyes bulged at the document, his fingers twitching toward it like a miser to gold. Gage didn't blink. "But here's what that paper don't say. It don't say who mended my shirt after the Comanche raid last fall. Don't say who memorized every foaling date in the ledger when the foreman took fever. Sure as hell don't say who stood between a starving homesteader's family and my trigger-happy cowhands last winter." His boot heel ground into the floorboards as he turned fully toward Clara. "That was all her. Your daughter, the woman you treat like a broken plow." A log shifted in the stove, sending up a shower of sparks. Then Huck, poor pampered Huck, cleared his throat. "Sir, if I may..." He stepped forward, his polished boots squeaking. "Back in Cheyenne, we've got a saying, land don't work itself and neither do women worth keeping." He glanced at Lillian, something unexpectedly tender in his face. Maybe we've all been looking at things backward." Silas's face purpled. "You ungrateful..." The back door burst open. Old man Pritchard stood framed in the doorway, his suspenders dangling, and his breath coming hard. "Silas, the south pasture's ablaze." Chaos erupted. Lillian screamed. Huck reached for his absent gun. But Clara saw the flicker in Gage's eyes, the way his hand twitched toward hers. This was no accident. As Silas bolted outside, Gage leaned close, his whisper warm against Clara's ear. "Your choice, darling. Stay and burn with the past, or ride with me toward something new." Outside, the horizon glowed orange. The wedding decorations fluttered like ghosts in the rising wind. Clara didn't look back as she reached for her bonnet. Some fences needed breaking, some fires needed lighting, and some women were done being invisible. The wedding bells had barely stopped ringing when Clara felt the first prickle of unease. Standing at the edge of the churchyard, she adjusted her borrowed blue dress, Lillian's second best, and scanned the crowd for Gage. The harvest dance would begin soon, and every rustle of petticoats made her heart leap. Then she saw him. Gage Thornton stood at the edge of the lantern light, his black hat pulled low, watching the celebration like a wolf studying sheep. But when his eyes found hers, the hardness melted into something that made her knees weak. He moved through the crowd with purpose, nodding politely to the townsfolk who suddenly found the Dawson spinster worth noticing. "Thought you might have changed your mind," he said when he reached her, his voice rough with something that wasn't quite doubt. Clara twisted her mother's lace handkerchief, the only pretty thing she owned. "I don't break my word, Mr. Thornton." His smile flashed white in the twilight. "Good, because I brought you something." From behind his back, he produced a single sunflower, its golden petals vibrant against his work-roughened hands. "Saw it growing wild by the creek. Reminded me of you." Clara's breath caught. No one had ever brought her flowers. Across the dance floor, Silas Dawson's face darkened like a thunderhead. He pushed through the crowd, whiskey sloshing from his glass. "You," he jabbed a finger at Gage, "got no right turning my daughter's head with your..." The fiddle music screeched to a halt. Every eye turned as Lillian stepped forward in her wedding finery, her voice carrying clear as a bell. "Pa, enough." She moved to Clara's side, her satin skirts whispering rebellion. "If you ruin this night for her, you ruin it for me too." A murmur rippled through the guests. Huck, looking torn between familial duty and new matrimonial loyalty, shuffled to his bride's side. Maybe we should let the ladies enjoy their evening." Silas's jaw worked. For one terrible moment, Clara thought he might strike someone. Then Gage did the unexpected. He extended his hand. "Mr. Dawson," he said evenly, "how about we settle this like men one dance? If Clara chooses me, when the music stops, you walk away. If not, I ride out tonight and never look back." The crowd held its breath. Clara's pulse roared in her ears as her father's gaze flicked between them. Then with a grunt, Silas snatched a fresh drink from a passing tray and stalked away. The fiddler struck up a waltz. Gage's hand found the small of Clara's back warm and sure. "You ready to show this town what they've been missing?" he murmured. As they spun into the lantern light, Clara Dawson, the invisible girl, the dutiful daughter, the woman who'd spent a lifetime waiting, finally learned what it meant to fly. The chestnut mare tossed her head as Clara approached, sunlight glinting off her sleek coat. Thatcher ran a hand down the horse's neck with the easy familiarity of a man who spoke the language of animals better than people. "Meet Sundown," he said, offering the reins. "She's got the smoothest gait this side of the Rockies." Clara hesitated, her fingers brushing the worn leather. "I haven't ridden since your pa decided you belonged in the kitchen instead of the saddle." Thatcher's voice was quiet, but the edge in it made her look up. His jaw was set, those green eyes seeing too much. "Time to remember who you were before the world told you who to be." The words unlocked something deep inside her. Clara grabbed the saddle horn and swung up in one fluid motion, the skirt of her riding habit flaring like wings. From the porch, Silas's voice cracked like a whip. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" Thatcher didn't even glance at him as he mounted his stallion. "Taking your daughter to see something worth seeing." As they rode past the church, whispers followed like tumbleweeds. Mrs. Patterson's scandalized gasp carried clear across the street. "That Dawson girl will come back ruined, mark my words." Thatcher's hand shot out, catching Clara's reins to halt both horses. He turned in the saddle, his voice carrying the quiet threat of a cocked hammer. "Ma'am, the only thing ruining women around here is small minds and smaller hearts." The town fell silent behind them as they rode into the open prairie. Wind rushed through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Clara breathed deep, feeling something tight in her chest begin to unravel. Then Thatcher guided them off the main trail up a rise where the land spread out like a promise. Below, nestled in a valley, stood a sturdy cabin beside a rushing creek. Newly built, its logs still golden in the sunlight. "That's the McCready line shack," Clara said, confused. "Was." Thatcher's gaze held hers. "Now it's yours if you want it. Got 40 acres of good grazing land tied to it." Clara's throat closed. The wind whipped loose strands of hair across her face as she stared at the homestead, at a future she'd never dared imagine. "Don't answer now," Thatcher murmured, his calloused fingers brushing hers as he passed her the reins again. "Just ride down there with me and see how it feels." And as sundown broke into a gallop, Clara Dawson did something she hadn't done since childhood. She laughed with pure, unbridled joy, the sound carrying across the plains like a declaration of war against every limitation ever placed upon her. The chestnut mare picked her way down the slope, her hooves kicking up little puffs of dust that caught the sunlight. Clara let the reins lie loose as Honey followed Thatcher's stallion into the valley, where a creek cut through the land like a silver thread. "Partly," Thatcher finally answered her question, reining in beside the water. He dismounted with that effortless grace of his and came to help her down, his hands lingering at her waist a heartbeat longer than necessary. "But mostly I came north because I was tired of being alone." The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Up close, Clara saw the faint scar along his jawline she hadn't noticed before, the way his sun-brown throat worked as he swallowed. This wasn't the confident stranger who'd faced down her father. This was a man showing her his cracks. Honey nudged her shoulder, breaking the moment. Thatcher chuckled and pulled an apple from his saddlebag, splitting it with his pocket knife. "Here," he said, offering half to Clara. "She'll love you forever." As Clara fed the mare, Thatcher crouched by the creek, swirling his fingers in the water. "This land's got good water year-round. Soil's rich, too." He stood abruptly, wiping his hands on his chaps. "Walk with me." They left the horses grazing and followed the creek's curve until the valley opened up to reveal a sprawling oak tree, its branches stretching wide enough to shade a small house. Beneath it sat the weathered remains of a foundation, charred timbers, and a crumbling stone chimney. Clara froze. "What happened here?" Thatcher's face darkened. "Homesteaders. McCready's men burned them out 5 years back when they refused to sell." He kicked at a blackened timber. "I didn't know about it till after. By then..." The pieces clicked together. That night in the kitchen when he'd spoken of standing between cowhands and starving families. The way he'd looked at her when she'd negotiated with suppliers. "You bought this land from the McCreadys," she realized aloud. "Every damn acre." Thatcher's voice was rough with something that wasn't quite anger. Figured the least I could do was return it to someone who'd care for it proper. He turned to face her fully, the dappled sunlight playing across his features. What do you think, Clara Dawson? Could you make something grow here? The question wasn't about crops or cattle. It was about roots, about healing scorched earth and broken promises, about building something that would last. Somewhere downstream, honey whinnied. The wind carried the scent of wild mint and turned earth. And Clara, who'd spent her life tending other people's dreams, finally understood what it meant to be asked about her own. She knelt, letting the rich soil sift through her fingers. When she looked up, her answer was already blooming between them, bright as the prairie sun. The land agent tipped his hat, his gaze flickering between them, with practiced assessment. Mr. Thornton, Miss. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Got the deed right here, just needs your signature. Thatcher didn't reach for it. Instead, he nodded toward Clara. She decides. Webb's eyebrows shot up. Beg pardon. Clara's pulse jumped as Thatcher stepped closer to her, his voice dropping to that rough, intimate tone that made her breath catch. This land's no good to me unless it's got your mark on it too. Say the word and it's yours. The offer hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. Clara stared at the weathered farmhouse, seeing not just peeling paint and rusted hinges, but mornings watching the sunrise from that porch, evenings, with her hands in rich soil, a life where she answered to no one but herself. Webb cleared his throat. Now, Mr. Thornton, the bank will need assurances. Thatcher cut him off with a look. The McCready gold in your vault says different. A beat passed. Then Webb sighed and turned to Clara with newfound respect. Well, miss, what's your decision? Somewhere in the cottonwoods a meadowlark sang. The creek murmured over smooth stones. And Clara Dawson, who'd spent a lifetime waiting for permission to exist, felt something unbreakable settle in her bones. I'll take it, she said. Thatcher's smile could have powered the sun. He reached into his saddlebag and produced a small wooden box. Inside lay a ring, simple, sturdy, with a single turquoise stone, the color of prairie sky. This belonged to my grandmother, he said, his voice rougher than usual. She was the toughest woman I ever knew. Built her ranch with her bare hands after Granddad died. Clara's hands trembled as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Webb coughed discreetly. I'll just give you folks a moment. He retreated to his horse, leaving them standing in the golden light of late afternoon. Thatcher's calloused fingers laced through hers. This isn't charity, Clara. It's partnership. You bring the vision, I'll bring the cattle. Together we'll make something that lasts. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth as Clara looked at the land, her land, and saw not just what it was, but what it could be. And for the first time in her life, she didn't just hope for tomorrow. She claimed it. As they neared the edge of town, Thatcher suddenly reined in his horse. One more stop, he said, nodding toward the old Miller place, a sagging barn that had stood empty since the family moved west last winter. Clara frowned as he dismounted and pulled something from his saddlebag. Close your eyes, he said, that familiar rough-edged tenderness in his voice. When she opened them, he'd pinned a weathered "For Sale" sign to the barn door, but someone had crossed out the words and painted in bold new letters, Future Dawson Thornton Mercantile and Feed Store. Clara's breath caught. That creek land's good for ranching, Thatcher said, stepping close enough that his shadow sheltered her from the setting sun. But I've been watching you negotiate with suppliers since I rode into town. You've got a head for business that had put most bankers to shame. He gestured to the building. This could be yours. Our cattle operation would supply the feed side, and you could stock whatever else this town needs. The vision unfolded before her, shelves of seed packets and calico fabric barrels of molasses, and nails the bell above the door, jingling as neighbors came to chat. A place where her skill with numbers and inventory would be valued, not hidden. Clara turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. Why are you doing this? Thatcher's calloused hand brushed hers, his thumb tracing the turquoise ring he'd given her. Because the West wasn't built by men alone, he said. It was built by partners. From down the street came the clatter of the evening stagecoach arriving. As dust swirled around them, Clara realized the truth. She wasn't riding back to her old life. She was standing at the edge of a new one. And this time when she stepped forward, it wouldn't be as someone's daughter or sister or unpaid labor. It would be as Clara Dawson Thornton, rancher merchant, and most astonishing of all, a woman who'd finally been seen for exactly who she was. The town clock struck 6 as they rode past the church where Mrs. Patterson stood gawking with her cronies. Clara sat straighter in the saddle, her braids swinging defiantly down her back. Let them whisper. Tomorrow she'd be ordering inventory. The study door creaked as Clara pushed it open, revealing Silas hunched over his ledger whiskey glass at his elbow. He looked up, eyes narrowing at the sight of Thornton in his Sunday best. What's this about? Thatcher removed his hat and held it over his heart. Sir, I've come to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. The pen slipped from Silas's fingers, leaving an ink blot spreading across the page like a storm cloud. He opened his mouth, no doubt, to list all the reasons Clara wasn't worth the asking, when Thatcher reached into his coat and laid a folded document on the desk. Silas squinted at the paper. What's this? Bill of sale for the McCready herd. Signed over to me last night. Thatcher's voice was calm, but Clara saw the muscle jump in his jaw. I'm prepared to offer half the herd as bride price. Clara's breath caught. The McCreadys ran 3,000 head. It was a fortune beyond anything her father had dreamed of. Silas's fingers trembled as he touched the paper. Then unexpectedly, he pushed it away. You think I'd sell my daughter like cattle at auction? Thatcher didn't blink. No, sir. I think you'd finally acknowledge her worth. A log shifted in the fireplace. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked where Lillian was no doubt eavesdropping. Silas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wood floor. He moved to the window, staring out at the autumn-bright trees for a long moment before turning back. His voice, when it came, was rougher than usual. You'll treat her right? Clara's knees nearly buckled. Thatcher's answer came swift and sure. Every damn day of my life. Silas nodded once, then reached for the whiskey bottle and 2 glasses. As he poured, his eyes met Clara's, really met them, for the first time in years. There was something there she hadn't seen since childhood. Something like respect. To new beginnings, Silas said, raising his glass. Thatcher's hand found Clara's, their fingers intertwining, as the late morning sun streamed through the window, gilding the dust motes and ledger books, and all the broken things that might yet be mended. Outside, a flock of geese arrowed south across the sky, their cries carrying like promises on the crisp October air. And Clara Dawson, soon to be Thornton, realized she was no longer waiting for her life to begin. It already had. Silas Dawson surprised them all by reaching into his desk drawer and pulling out a worn leather ledger. He flipped it open to a page marked with a faded ribbon. This was your mother's dowry, he said, his voice gruff as he pushed the book toward Clara. 500 acres of prime grazing land up near Laramie, meant to give it to you when... He trailed off, unable to say the words. When someone finally saw your worth. Clara's fingers trembled as she touched the brittle pages. The land had been in her mother's family for generations. She'd assumed it had been sold off long ago to cover debts. Thatcher let out a low whistle. That's the parcel bordering the McCready North Range. He squeezed Clara's hand. With that and the herd, we'll build our children, will inherit an empire. The word children sent warmth flooding through Clara's chest. She looked up to find her father blinking rapidly, his calloused hands gripping the edge of the desk. In that moment, she saw the man he might have been, the loving father buried beneath years of disappointment. The front door slammed open, followed by the rapid click of Lillian's heels across the hardwood. She burst into the study, her cheeks flushed. I heard everything from the stairs. Without ceremony, she threw her arms around Clara. You're getting married. Her whisper was fierce against Clara's ear. And you're getting away. As Lillian pulled back, Clara saw the glimmer of tears in her sister's cornflower blue eyes. For the first time, she recognized the same longing she'd carried for so long, the desperate wish to be seen for more than just a pretty face. Thatcher cleared his throat. There's one more thing. He reached into his vest pocket and produced a second velvet box. Huck told me to give you this when the time came. He pressed it into Lillian's hand. Inside lay a delicate silver locket, its surface engraved with wild roses. Lillian's breath caught as she lifted it to the light. But Huck and I already exchanged gifts at the wedding. That's from me. The deep voice came from the doorway, where Huck stood looking uncharacteristically nervous. Figured it was time I started seeing the woman behind the smile. His gaze held Lillian's with an intensity that made Clara's heart swell. If you'll let me. The study, once a place of ledgers and loneliness, now brimmed with something Clara had long stopped hoping for. Possibility. Outside, the wind carried the scent of turning leaves and wood smoke of endings and beginnings woven together. And as Silas poured whiskey for the men and sherry for his daughters, a first, Clara realized that love, true love, didn't just transform the people who shared it. It changed everything it touched. The church fell silent as Thatcher took both of Clara's hands in his. His calloused thumbs traced circles over her knuckles as he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. October, Clara Dawson. He began, I don't promise you roses or sunshine. The prairie gives what it gives, and some years are leaner than others. A murmur ran through the congregation. But I do promise this, when the storms come, you'll never face them alone. When the work's hard, we'll shoulder it together. And when the land yields its bounty, we'll share that too. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a single brass key warm from his body heat. This opens the mercantile we're building together. Because I'm not just marrying the woman I love, I'm partnering with the smartest business mind in Wyoming territory. Clara's breath caught as she took the key, its teeth biting into her palm. Around them, she heard gasps, most notably from Mrs. Patterson in the front pew. Then Thatcher did something even more shocking. He knelt right there at the altar, pressing his forehead to their joined hands. You're my equal in every way, Clara Thornton. Never forget that. The minister cleared his throat, flustered by this break from tradition. But Clara barely noticed. Her vision blurred as she lifted Thatcher up and spoke her own vows, not the flowery words from the book, but the truth burning in her heart. I promise to stand beside you, not behind you, to speak my mind and trust your heart, and to build something that lasts longer than either of us. She squeezed his hands. Starting today, as they turned to face the crowded church, Clara caught sight of her father wiping his eyes unashamedly. Beside him, Lillian beamed through happy tears, her hand clasped in Huck's. The organ swelled, and as they walked back down the aisle, man and wife partners in every sense, Clara realized the whispers had changed. No longer pitying or skeptical, but filled with wonder. And when they stepped into the winter sunlight, the entire town waiting to cheer them, Clara Thornton finally understood sometimes the greatest adventures weren't found in riding off into the sunset. They were built right where you stood, one honest day at a time. The lantern light had revealed a sturdy little building with a freshly painted sign, Dawson and Thornton, Land Management and Mercantile Supply. Below it, in smaller letters, Proprietors C&T Thornton. Clara had turned to him, the snow catching in her lashes. You put my name first. Thatcher's smile had been softer than the falling snow. Your idea, your business sense, you earned top billing. He'd pulled her close, his breath warm against her ear. Besides, I like the way it sounds when people call you Mrs. Thornton businesswoman. Now, as Christmas Eve dusk painted the snow in shades of blue and violet, Clara watched her husband check the sleigh's harness with those same careful hands that had built her dreams from scratch. The jingle of bells announced the arrival of Vera and Huck's carriage, its sides festooned with evergreen boughs. Ready, partner? Thatcher asked, offering his arm. Clara took one last look at their home, the smoke curling from the chimney, the lantern light glowing in the windows, the business sign standing proud in the yard, before slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. Ready, Shirley, she said. As the sleigh glided across the snow-dusted prairie, the bells keeping time with her heartbeat, Clara realized something remarkable. The woman who'd once been invisible now carried an entire world within her, a home, a business, a love that had rewritten her story from the ground up. And when Thatcher's laughter rang out clear in the crisp winter air, mingling with hers as they raced Vera's carriage toward town, Clara Thornton knew with absolute certainty the best adventures weren't the ones you dreamed about. They were the ones you built side by side in the unlikeliest of places. As the sleigh rounded the bend toward town, a familiar figure appeared in the road. Silas Dawson, standing stiffly in his Sunday coat, holding a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Thatcher slowed the horses as Clara's breath caught in her throat. Thought you might need this for the feast, Silas said gruffly, thrusting the package toward her. The rich aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg escaped the folds her mother's fruitcake recipe, the one he'd forbidden her to make after the funeral. Clara's fingers trembled as she took it. You kept her mixing bowl. Silas's Adam's apple bobbed. Kept more than that. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. When he tipped it into her palm, her mother's pearl earrings, the ones she'd thought lost, caught the lantern light. Thatcher squeezed her shoulder as Silas cleared his throat. Your ma would have wanted you to have 'em on Christmas. He hesitated, then added quietly, she'd be right proud of the woman you've become. The words hung between them, fragile as the snowflakes melting on the woolen robes. Then Silas did something he hadn't done since Clara was a child. He leaned in and pressed a rough kiss to her forehead before turning abruptly toward town. Clara clutched the earrings and cake, watching her father's retreating back, until the snow swallowed him from view. Thatcher didn't speak, just tucked the buffalo robe tighter around her shoulders and let her tears fall unchecked. When they arrived at Vera's, the house blazed with light and laughter. But as Clara stepped inside, her sister took one look at her face and pulled her into the kitchen without a word. "Pa gave me Mama's earrings," Clara whispered, pressing them to her heart. Vera's eyes shone as she fastened them for her. "He's been keeping them in his Bible all these years." She smoothed Clara's hair, her voice softening. "Turns out some hearts take longer to thaw than others." The Christmas feast that followed was louder and merrier than any Clara could remember. When she brought out the fruitcake, its flavor exactly as her mother had made it, even Thatcher's eyes grew suspiciously bright. Later, as they rode home beneath a sky brilliant with stars, Clara nestled against her husband, the earrings warm against her skin, the taste of cinnamon and redemption sweet on her tongue. The prairie stretched before them, white and endless, but Clara Thornton no longer saw emptiness when she looked at the horizon. She saw possibility. She saw home. And most miraculous of all, she saw herself reflected in the love she'd somehow been brave enough to accept.